Please, don't kick me. I'm already hurt." The words sliced through the polished hum of Veritas Lounge like lightning striking a glass chandelier. Every head turned. Every eye locked onto the source of the voice. Serena Williams, a young black waitress with eyes like molten chocolate and a quiet resilience that belied her 24 years, stood frozen for a heartbeat, hands gripping the edge of a silver tray, as the scent of roasted salmon and truffle butter hung heavy in the air. The room seemed to pause, the clinking of glasses and muted jazz fading into a suspended hush, broken only by the subtle rustle of silk gowns and tailored suits shifting in disbelief. She had been working 2 back-to-back shifts that day, her feet aching from hours of standing on polished hardwood floors, carrying plates of fine cuisine to diners who barely acknowledged her presence. Her apron was crisp, her ponytail tight, uniform spotless, but no one noticed the careful precision in the way she moved, the way she balanced champagne flutes like a seasoned performer, the quiet grace she carried like armor. Across the room, the man who held the power to bend contracts, investments, and egos to his will, Richard Langston, billionaire CEO of Langston Technologies, sat leaning back in a high-backed leather chair, his tailored navy suit impeccable, hair perfectly combed, and a calm smile that rarely cracked. He was 40, white, and exuded the kind of confidence that made people follow his instructions without question, the kind of presence that could silence a room without raising a voice. Yet tonight, the balance of that confidence was about to be challenged in a way he could never predict. Serena's mind raced, a stream of observations as sharp as the crystal glasses around her. She noticed the tremor of hesitation in a waiter delivering the next table's wine, the way the chandelier cast fractured shadows across polished marble, the subtle shift in the diner's posture as if they felt the tension, even if they didn't understand its source. Her own heart pounded, but she stood her ground, not out of defiance, but out of necessity. For months, she had perfected the art of invisibility, mastering how to move unnoticed, how to absorb every whispered insult, every microaggression, every glance that suggested she was worth nothing beyond a tray of food. And now, at the precipice of that invisible life, her voice, the one that usually remained silent, cut through the luxury like a blade of sunlight through storm clouds. Richard's eyes flickered, a micro-expression betraying that he had not anticipated this. The room held its breath. Serena took a step forward, subtle but deliberate, her movements precise, like a dancer aware of every inch of the stage. She didn't shout, she didn't plead. Her tone was calm, steady, resolute. The words she had just spoken carried more weight than the designer suits around her, more authority than the gold-rimmed glasses and fine porcelain that lined the tables. She saw the fleeting doubt ripple across Richard's face, a crack in the armor of his composed exterior. The tension was electric, a current that ran from her steady hands up through the chandelier-lit ceiling, down into every polished table, every sharp cufflink, every whispered gasp. For Serena, this was more than a moment. It was a culmination of years spent observing, learning, and surviving in spaces that had never been built for her. Every shift, every ignored compliment, every sideways glance had prepared her for this instant, and she seized it not with anger but with a quiet, commanding authority. The room remained suspended, the fine hum of the city outside the glass walls distant and muted. Richard's calm demeanor wavered, the first hint of frustration glinting in his cold steel eyes, as if he realized the ground beneath his carefully constructed empire might just have shifted, even if only for a heartbeat. And yet Serena did not retreat. She did not flinch. She simply stood there, radiating a combination of dignity, intellect, and unwavering courage that filled the space more completely than the ambient light could. Every diner, every employee, every unseen observer who had previously discounted her presence now felt the gravity of her existence, the undeniable weight of someone who refused to be invisible. This was a story that moved beyond wealth and status, a story where human resilience and quiet power intersected, a narrative of morality and justice that no gold coin could measure, no contract could quantify, and no suit could project. The air felt charged, suspenseful, like the calm before a storm that everyone knew was coming but no one could predict. As Serena's gaze met Richard's, steady and unyielding, and in that silent moment, The rules of the room shifted, the narrative rewritten by a single voice that refused to be overlooked, a voice that had finally spoken. The ambient lighting of Veritas Lounge shimmered off polished silverware and the crystal glasses, casting a soft golden glow over the hardwood floors. Every detail was meticulously arranged, from the folded napkins aligned precisely on each plate to the soft classical jazz that floated through the air. Yet beneath this elegance, tension crackled like static electricity. Serena Williams adjusted her tray with deliberate care, her almond-shaped eyes scanning the room with sharp focus, noting every subtle shift in posture, every twitch of a wrist, every hurried glance that hinted at underlying unease. She had spent years mastering this delicate dance, learning to move with purpose yet remain unseen, a skill forged in the quiet resilience required to navigate spaces where her presence was often discounted. Behind her, the scent of freshly baked bread mingled with roasted duck and hints of truffle oil, creating a sensory map she had memorized, each aroma signaling the position of the patrons she served. Richard Langston, seated at the center table, remained a figure of composed authority, his posture relaxed yet commanding, the tailored navy suit hugging the lines of his shoulders with exacting precision. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, flicked over the room, catching movements, absorbing details, the kind of gaze that had earned him control over multi-billion-dollar deals and boardrooms filled with influential men and women. Yet tonight, the weight of his presence was counterbalanced by a subtle but undeniable shift in energy that Serena could feel in her chest, a quiet ripple in the otherwise controlled environment. As she moved between tables, offering wine and clearing empty plates, her mind cataloged the room with a methodical precision, noting which guests were aware of the tension and which remained oblivious, who whispered under their breath, and who attempted to maintain polite smiles despite the taut atmosphere. Each step she took was calculated, every gesture measured to convey professionalism without drawing undue attention. Her thoughts briefly drifted to her younger brother waiting at home, the small apartment in Brooklyn she shared with him and her mother, the life that demanded she grow both strength and subtlety in equal measure. Serena's internal monologue was as precise as the motions of her hands, anticipating potential missteps, planning how to navigate sudden interruptions, and preparing to react with clarity if confronted. In the background, waitstaff moved with practiced efficiency, but none carried the quiet weight of observation Serena had cultivated. Their motions were routine, almost mechanical, whereas she saw the ebb and flow of influence in every glance, every inflection of voice, every micro-expression among the diners. The soft hum of conversation carried hints of curiosity and discomfort, subtle questions embedded in polite tones, questions Serena did not need to hear aloud to understand. Across the room, Richard leaned slightly forward, a micro-expression crossing his face that suggested he had sensed the shift as well, the faint tightening of his jaw, the brief narrowing of his eyes, indicating that the equilibrium he relied upon was no longer assured. Serena continued to circulate, each movement reinforcing her silent presence, creating a tension that was invisible yet palpable, a story written in posture, gaze, and the careful alignment of objects around her. Patrons unconsciously adjusted their own stances, sensing the undercurrent, the subtle authority of someone who had long been underestimated yet now commanded attention without raising her voice. The chandeliers above reflected the precise orchestration of light and shadow, dancing across Serena's focused expression, amplifying the gravity of the moment and underscoring the quiet but undeniable shift in power. Dynamics that was unfolding in real time. Every breath, every micro-movement, every soft sound became a part of this intricate narrative, a tapestry of tension, observation, and anticipation, setting the stage for the next move in a story that was about to redefine the boundaries of presence, influence, and respect in a space that had never quite expected her to occupy it. Serena navigated the space with the precision of someone who had mapped every table, every chair, every subtle shift in light and shadow, each step deliberate, almost choreographed, her focus unwavering as she moved closer to the center of attention. The soft hum of the air conditioning blended with the faint clinking of cutlery, a subtle counterpoint to the tension that seemed to thrum in the room like a quiet undercurrent, and she could sense every eye now following her movements. Every whisper of curiosity and speculation carried on the low murmur of conversation. Her mind cataloged each reaction, noting which diners flinched, which leaned forward, and which attempted to mask their fascination behind polite smiles. A complex web of social signals that she had learned to read with the acuity of a strategist. Richard Langston remained seated, his posture still poised, but the faint twitch at the corner of his mouth and the barely perceptible narrowing of his eyes betrayed a shift in his normally impenetrable composure, a recognition that the previously invisible presence of the waitress now commanded attention and influence over the room. Serena adjusted her tray with a careful, fluid motion, the soft clatter of fine china a deliberate punctuation to the tension, and in that moment she became aware of the intricate choreography that defined the restaurant. The unseen rhythms of service, the interplay of authority and expectation, and how she could subtly manipulate that flow to assert her presence without disrupting the professionalism of the environment. She moved deliberately, each action calculated to project competence and calm, a quiet assertion of control over the moment, and she could feel the energy of the room bending subtly in response to her measured confidence. Guests shifted in their seats, some leaning in with curiosity, others straightening in their posture, their peripheral attention drawn irresistibly toward the figure of Serena, whose quiet authority now dominated the space, without a single raised voice. Richard's gaze tracked her movements, the calm confidence that usually radiated from him now tinged with a flicker of uncertainty, and it became clear that the balance of power in the room had subtly altered, a demonstration of influence not through words or force, but through composure, presence, and awareness. Serena's thoughts remained focused, noting the way the candlelight reflected off polished glass and silver, how the shadows created depth and nuance in the room, and how every detail, every micro-movement, contributed to a narrative she was crafting in real time, one that unfolded not in grand gestures, but in the silent authority of observation, timing, and poise. The quiet hum of activity around her, the careful dance of servers and diners, created a layered backdrop against which her own presence resonated, the tension coalescing into a palpable sense of anticipation, the room collectively leaning toward an outcome yet unseen, and Serena's awareness of that anticipation allowed her to move with deliberate grace, asserting influence through attention, calm, and the subtle projection of intelligence and dignity that could command respect without demanding it. Every breath, every controlled motion, every slight turn of the head became a signal, a punctuation in the unspoken conversation that filled the room, shaping perception and expectation, guiding the energy of the diners and staff alike, and reinforcing the quiet assertion of her authority in a space that had long underestimated her presence. In this carefully orchestrated moment, Serena became both observer and participant, simultaneously reading the room and shaping it, the subtle shifts in attention and expectation responding to her awareness, and the collective energy of the space bending imperceptibly to acknowledge the quiet, undeniable weight of her presence, demonstrating that true influence could be asserted not through domination, but through composure, insight, and the deliberate management of perception. The soft golden glow of the chandeliers reflected off the polished mahogany tables, casting a warm radiance over every carefully set plate and sparkling glass. Yet beneath the surface elegance, the tension persisted, subtle but undeniable. Serena Williams continued her steady circulation, each step measured, her mind cataloging the reactions of the diners and staff alike, noting the flicker of surprise, the barely perceptible straightening of posture, the quiet murmurs that rippled through the air like a current invisible yet felt. Her presence had shifted the dynamic of the room, transforming the once predictable patterns of interaction into a delicate dance of observation and influence, where each movement she made carried weight beyond the physical, an unspoken assertion of competence and awareness that demanded acknowledgement. Richard Langston, seated at the central table, observed her with a focus sharpened by curiosity and a faint edge of unease, the subtle shift in his normally unflappable demeanor indicating that the carefully maintained equilibrium he relied upon had been disrupted. Serena's thoughts flowed in parallel with her physical movements. Each adjustment of the tray, each slight tilt of her head, each step forward or back, contributing to a narrative constructed entirely from awareness and intention, a quiet mastery of the environment that spoke louder than words or gestures. The ambient jazz continued, but now it underscored the silent tension rather than soothing it, every note echoing against the polished floors, harmonizing with the collective pulse of attention that Serena had subtly drawn toward herself. Her eyes met those of the diners momentarily, acknowledging their curiosity without conceding any power, projecting confidence and calm, a signal that the room itself had changed in the presence of someone who had been long underestimated. She caught the reflection of Richard in the glass of a water goblet, his expression a careful mask, yet the imperceptible tightening of his jaw and the slight narrowing of his eyes betrayed a flicker of consideration, an acknowledgement of her impact on the environment, however quietly. Serena's body language remained poised, her shoulders square, her movements flowing yet precise, a dance perfected over years of navigating spaces where she was expected to remain invisible, and yet tonight her silent assertion had rewritten the expectations of all present. The patrons, previously engrossed in conversation and dining, now absorbed the tension in the room, the air thick with anticipation, as if time itself had slowed to accommodate the unfolding subtle drama, where observation, presence, and intelligence outweighed status, wealth, and appearance. Serena noted every micro-expression, the way guests shifted in their seats, the slight leaning forward of those curious to understand, the brief exchange of glances between colleagues, all elements in a tapestry she was quietly weaving without a single word. Richard's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, a subtle admission that the balance of attention had moved, if only slightly, from him to her, a testament to the quiet authority she now exercised through awareness and composure. Each breath she took, each precise adjustment of the tray, each careful step through the restaurant contributed to a narrative she controlled, a story told in posture, gaze, and deliberate, unspoken signals, asserting influence not through confrontation, but through the measured, undeniable weight of presence and mastery over her environment. The room, once predictable in its hierarchy of status and attention, now hummed with a new energy, a recognition of subtle power, and Serena, moving with quiet confidence, embodied the assertion that competence, awareness, and dignity could command influence in a space that had never expected her to occupy it with such authority, reshaping perception and expectation without uttering a single confrontational word. The moment Serena reached the central aisle, the subtle orchestration of the restaurant seemed to shift entirely around her presence. The clatter of silverware and the soft murmur of conversation became secondary to the unspoken narrative she was quietly asserting, each step and gesture layered with intention. She observed the diners with acute awareness, noting the slight changes in posture, the brief exchanges of glances, the way some held their breath ever so slightly, and she understood that her composure alone was altering the energy in the room. Richard Langston, still seated with a carefully curated mask of calm, could not entirely conceal the flicker of curiosity and tension that crossed his features. His steel-gray eyes followed her every movement, registering her subtle confidence and the controlled, deliberate nature of her interactions. Serena moved with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this choreography countless times in her mind, aware of the impact of every small action, the significance of each measured breath, the weight of her gaze as it skimmed over the attentive diners. The ambient lighting played across her features, highlighting the resolve in her almond-shaped eyes and the determined set of her jaw, signaling a quiet authority that demanded recognition without a single raised voice. The staff around her continued their movements with practiced efficiency, but it was Serena who commanded attention, the room responding to the quiet force of her awareness and intelligence. She adjusted a wine glass on the table with a fluid motion, aligning it perfectly, and the simple gesture drew a subtle, almost imperceptible acknowledgement from the diners, an unconscious recognition of her presence and mastery of the environment. The air itself seemed to shift, carrying a sense of anticipation and latent energy, as if the very architecture of the lounge had become an extension of her calculated influence. Richard's posture tightened imperceptibly, the first signs of disruption in his normally controlled presence, as he absorbed the realization that the focus of the room had subtly moved, drawn not by wealth, status, or authority, but by the deliberate, composed, and commanding presence of someone who had long been underestimated. Serena's mind continued its quiet assessment, cataloging the flow of movement, the interplay of shadows and light, the subtle indications of attention and curiosity in the diners, and she used this awareness to navigate the space with grace and authority, asserting influence in a way that was both silent and unmistakable. The subtle patterns of glances and gestures, the quiet adjustments of the diner's posture, the shifting tension in the air all contributed to a tapestry of perception that Serena managed with expertise, demonstrating that command of presence and composure could redefine the dynamics of an entire room. Every breath she took, every slight tilt of her head, every precise motion of her hands became a part of a larger rhythm, a silent orchestration that controlled attention and subtly rewrote the hierarchy of awareness and respect in the room. The ambient sounds, from the gentle clinking of glasses to the faint rustle of linens and the low hum of conversation, underscored the tension and anticipation, amplifying the impact of Serena's movements and decisions as she quietly asserted her authority, navigating the space with deliberate intelligence and poise. In this intricate moment, the restaurant itself seemed to bend around her presence, acknowledging her quiet power and the undeniable weight of her composure, shaping perception and expectation in ways that no amount of wealth or status could dictate, proving that influence could be commanded without a single word of confrontation. Serena's awareness sharpened as she approached the center of the room, every movement now a deliberate conversation with the space itself, each gesture and step projecting authority without a single word spoken. The soft glow of the chandeliers traced her outline, casting subtle shadows that mirrored the tension she had cultivated, and the polished hardwood floors reflected both the elegance of the lounge and the intensity of the moment. Patrons instinctively leaned forward, their curiosity piqued, some gripping their glasses a little tighter, others exchanging quiet glances as they sensed the shift in dynamics that had quietly settled over the tables. Richard Langston's eyes followed her with a measured intensity, the usually steady confidence in his posture now tempered by the realization that Serena's presence carried a weight that exceeded mere service or observation. She moved through the space with the precision of someone conducting a symphony, her hands placing plates and adjusting glassware with flawless timing, each subtle movement orchestrating attention and respect in equal measure. Serena noted the micro-expressions on the faces of the diners, the faint rise of eyebrows, the slight parting of lips, the almost imperceptible nods of acknowledgement, understanding that her composure and deliberate presence had begun to redefine the narrative in the room. The subtle fragrance of roasted duck mingled with truffle oil and aged wine, a sensory backdrop against which Serena's quiet command unfolded, each note emphasizing the contrast between her calm authority and the previously unchallenged dominance of Richard Langston. She observed the interplay of light across polished surfaces, noting how reflections in crystal glasses amplified her measured movements, creating a rhythm that subtly directed the focus of attention throughout the room. Richard's composed demeanor betrayed the slightest tension, a micro-movement of his shoulders and a shift in his gaze indicating awareness that the equilibrium he had relied upon was subtly but decisively altered. Serena's mind cataloged the energy in the room, noting which diners were drawn into the silent dialogue she was conducting, which remained indifferent, and how each micro-interaction added to the unspoken authority she now exerted. Each step, each careful tilt of the tray, each controlled gesture functioned as a component of a larger, intricate narrative, demonstrating that influence could be asserted without confrontation through awareness, precision, and quiet confidence. The staff continued their movements around her, efficient but now subtly responding to the changes she had instigated in the atmosphere, the rhythm of service adjusting to accommodate the shift in focus and authority. Serena's eyes met those of Richard Langston briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, the recognition of her influence and composure mirrored in the slight narrowing of his gaze and the subtle adjustment of his posture. The ambient jazz, the soft murmur of conversations, and the clinking of silverware all combined to form a layered soundtrack to the unspoken drama, each element reinforcing the silent assertion of Serena's authority and the careful orchestration of attention. The room itself seemed to respond to her presence, the energy subtly bending, the diner's awareness drawn to her without a single direct command. And in this orchestrated moment, Serena demonstrated the quiet power of observation, timing, and unwavering composure, proving that influence could be commanded and respect earned through dignity, intelligence, and the careful management of presence, transforming a previously predictable environment into a stage where subtlety and poise dictated the flow of authority. The room held its breath as Serena moved with deliberate grace, the culmination of hours of observation, anticipation, and calculated composure converging in each subtle gesture. Every diner seemed to lean slightly forward, their attention drawn not by authority, wealth, or loud declarations, but by the quiet magnetism of someone who had mastered presence and awareness through years of navigating spaces that seldom acknowledged her existence. Richard Langston, seated at the central table, exuded calm on the surface, yet the faint tightening of his jaw, the brief flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, and the imperceptible shift in his posture betrayed the internal recalibration occurring as he measured the quiet power she wielded without a word. Serena's hands adjusted a water glass with measured precision, her movements reflecting a balance between efficiency and subtle assertion, each action reinforcing her command over the flow of attention in the lounge. The chandeliers above scattered pools of soft light across the polished floors and mirrored surfaces, accentuating the interplay of movement, shadow, and focus, turning the room into a dynamic stage where perception and composure dictated influence. She noticed the diner's micro-expressions, the way a few held their breath, the subtle tilts of heads, the near imperceptible widening of eyes, all elements feeding into the tapestry of awareness she was orchestrating, silently guiding the energy and attention of every individual present. Richard's carefully curated poise now carried the weight of scrutiny, a recognition that the balance of attention had shifted in an invisible but undeniable manner, acknowledging Serena's presence and mastery over the space. The ambient jazz hummed in the background, blending with the faint clatter of cutlery and the whisper of linens, yet it was the unspoken dialogue, communicated through posture, movement, and intent, that now dominated the atmosphere. Serena's mind cataloged every subtle cue, every responsive motion, and she used this information to navigate the environment with an elegance that commanded respect, demonstrating the quiet potency of composure, intelligence, and awareness. Patrons who had initially been absorbed in their own meals now watched her, their perceptions shifting as they recognized the deliberate authority with which she moved, a presence that reshaped expectations and silently dictated the flow of focus and engagement. Each subtle adjustment, from the alignment of a napkin to the angle of a wine glass, became a tool of influence, the rhythm of service harmonizing with the unspoken hierarchy she was subtly establishing. Richard's gaze occasionally met hers, a brief acknowledgement of the shift, a recognition that influence and respect could not solely be commanded through position or wealth, but earned through composure, observation, and strategic presence. The air itself seemed charged, the collective attention of the diners converging upon Serena as she navigated the room with quiet certainty, illustrating the power of careful observation, timing, and poise in reshaping dynamics that had long been assumed immutable. Every breath, every motion, every deliberate interaction contributed to a crescendo of silent authority that transformed the environment, proving that presence and intelligence could command attention and redefine influence without confrontation or words, leaving an indelible impression on every individual in the room and affirming that dignity and awareness are forces that resonate more powerfully than wealth or status ever could. As the evening progressed, the energy in Veritas Lounge remained taut with anticipation, every subtle movement and measured breath carrying significance that Serena Williams understood instinctively. She moved with precision through the refined space, her eyes scanning the room to anticipate the reactions of diners, staff, and Richard Langston, whose composed exterior now displayed traces of uncertainty that only heightened the intensity of the atmosphere. The light from the chandeliers scattered across the polished mahogany, creating dancing reflections on crystal glassware and casting gentle shadows that accentuated Serena's deliberate gestures, each motion a part of a carefully orchestrated rhythm that commanded attention without a single word raised. Patrons, previously absorbed in their own conversations, now subtly redirected their awareness toward her, their body language reflecting fascination, curiosity, and silent respect, as if they collectively sensed the quiet authority she exuded. Richard's gaze followed her movements with growing attentiveness, the precise tilt of his head, the small narrowing of his eyes, and the faint tension in his shoulders betraying the recognition that the room's focus was shifting in a way that had never occurred to him before. Serena continued to adjust table settings and place glasses with fluid exactness, each movement reinforcing her presence and the undeniable weight of her composure, subtly influencing the flow of attention and respect throughout the lounge. The air itself seemed charged, a quiet electric tension that spread from her calculated steps to the edges of the room, altering the rhythm of interactions and the perception of authority without a single confrontational gesture. She noticed every microexpression, every brief intake of breath, every slight shift in posture, and incorporated these observations into her movements, weaving an unspoken dialogue that shaped the behavior of diners and staff alike, demonstrating the power of awareness, timing, and control over one's presence. Richard's posture subtly shifted, his carefully maintained aura of dominance now tempered by the realization that influence could be commanded through dignity, composure, and strategic awareness, rather than position or wealth alone. Serena's controlled actions and quiet vigilance transformed the space into a dynamic stage, where the unspoken rules of hierarchy and attention were silently redefined, the room responding to her presence as if acknowledging a new center of gravity. The subtle interplay of light, shadow, reflection, and movement created an environment in which Serena's quiet authority was both palpable and inescapable, demonstrating that respect and influence could be asserted without a word of overt confrontation. Every breath she took, every measured step, every precise adjustment to glassware and napkins contributed to a cohesive, silent narrative that commanded the collective attention of all present, emphasizing the power of patience, insight, and presence. The ambient jazz, the soft murmurs of diners, and the quiet efficiency of the waitstaff formed a layered backdrop to the unfolding dynamic, highlighting the contrast between Serena's composed influence and the previously unquestioned authority of Richard Langston. The room, now attuned to her presence, seemed to breathe in sync with her movements, each observer subtly recognizing the shift in energy and the assertion of a quiet, deliberate power that radiated through composure, intelligence, and poise, proving that dignity and awareness can reshape perception and demand acknowledgement in any space, regardless of pre-existing hierarchies, and leaving an indelible impression on everyone present as Serena continued to navigate the lounge with unparalleled grace and command. As the evening drew toward its final moments, the energy in Veritas Lounge held a remarkable stillness, the tension and anticipation woven into every corner of the room, finally reaching a subtle crescendo. Serena Williams moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had spent years mastering both observation and presence, each step deliberate, each motion of her hands and tray calculated to maintain an atmosphere of poised authority. The diners watched attentively, their conversations dwindling to soft murmurs as the weight of her composed energy filled the space, commanding focus without a single raised voice. Richard Langston, seated at the central table, maintained his usual exterior of control, but the flicker of recognition in his eyes, the almost imperceptible tilt of his head, and the subtle tightening of his jaw indicated that he was fully aware of the shift in dynamics. The realization that Serena's calm, measured influence had redefined the attention and respect within the room. The polished floors reflected the ambient light from the chandeliers, creating dancing patterns across the tables and glassware, accentuating the elegance of the lounge while highlighting Serena's steady, precise movements as she continued to navigate the space with quiet mastery. She adjusted a wine glass with effortless accuracy, the small gesture reinforcing the subtle authority she now wielded, while the guests, drawn into the narrative she silently created, unconsciously mirrored the acknowledgement of her presence through posture, attentive glances, and the soft intake of breath that conveyed their awareness of her composure. Serena's mind cataloged every microexpression, every shift in weight or angle of attention, incorporating these subtle cues into her ongoing orchestration of the environment, demonstrating how influence could be asserted through observation, timing, and control over presence rather than overt statements or commands. The gentle hum of conversation and the soft clink of silverware formed a delicate backdrop against which the quiet power of her awareness resonated, each element in the room responding to her movements, as if recognizing her as the central axis of authority. Richard's gaze remained fixed, a silent dialogue unfolding in the space between them, an acknowledgement of the respect and attention Serena commanded through intelligence, poise, and deliberate action. The soft fragrance of truffle oil, roasted meats, and fresh bread mingled with the subtle warmth of the lighting to create a sensory landscape that reinforced the intensity of the moment, each element contributing to the immersive experience that highlighted Serena's ability to command focus without confrontation. Patrons, previously absorbed in their own meals, now found themselves captivated by the quiet orchestration of presence, the deliberate management of attention and energy that she executed flawlessly, demonstrating that influence could be earned and perceived through dignity, composure, and awareness rather than wealth, status, or assertion of power. Each breath Serena took, each careful movement of her hands, each poised step through the lounge reinforced the narrative she had subtly constructed, reshaping perception and expectation in ways that were both profound and unspoken. The room seemed to bend in harmony with her awareness, every observer acknowledging, consciously or not, the quiet authority she embodied, the power inherent in composure and intelligence, and the indelible impression of someone who could command attention and respect without a single word of confrontation or assertion, leaving a lasting resonance of presence, dignity, and strategic mastery in the minds of all who had